Thank you, Egon, for that very good presentation and also keeping to time. These sessions are shorter, and may I respectfully suggest that since we want to have a number of people saying something, to make your points very brief, give the main points of what you would like to say more extensively. Yuda, please, first.
I'd like to both agree and disagree with my friend Egon Friedler. We discussed the problem of outmarriages. We hardly mentioned the question that in the United States the Jewish birth rate is far below the minimum needed for reproduction. 1.4, 1.5. In Israel it's 2.3. And we might be faced with a Zionist dream turning into a Jewish nightmare. That in the future century, Israel is going to be the main place where Jews live, not because they want to go there, but because there won't be enough Jews left outside. And I think that is what we are discussing here. So that this beautiful future is not assured. It is not assured also from another point of view. We look at reality as though because we live in an instant generation. We have instant coffee, we have instant information about things that are going on today which we forget tomorrow. And we seem to forget that anti-Semitism, which has been declining in the United States, which has reached in 1995 a plateau worldwide, not increasing, not perhaps decreasing too much, that we are faced with waves of anti-Semitism since World War II, which we cannot explain. We don't know why these things are happening. The old explanations are all wrong. There is no economic explanation for anti-Semitism after World War II. There's no political explanation. We don't know what is facing us in the future. I'm not trying to be alarmist, because I don't know, maybe that downward trend may continue. I'm not assured at all. And I think that this bland assumption that we are faced, all we are faced with are our internal problems, is quite wrong. Third, we discussed here yesterday why we are Jewish, as though it wasn't so perfectly clear. We are Jewish because general human values are expressed in Jewish terms, in Jewish environment, in Jewish tradition, of which we are the continuation in one way or another. And that's beautiful. Now, what do we do with that? I think that what we have to deal with much more realistically is not to think in terms of utopias. My good friend Bernard Reisman said yesterday, or was it the day before, I don't remember anymore, you said one of your voids was that we have to re-establish Jewish unity. Heaven forbid. We exist, we prosper on this unity. And there is not the slightest chance in the world that there will be Jewish unity in the future. And what we need is to emphasize, just as Egon just said, rightly I think, that the fact that we are pluralistic is a strength and not a weakness.
What about unity in disunity?
Well, okay, we all engage in dialectics, but I think it's clear, it's clear what we mean. I think I'll end there.
Yes, Renee, please.
One of the things we have not talked about, because it's not been relevant really to this colloquium, is the socio-economic context, at least in the United States when we're talking about American Jews, in which we're living. And I think we can't ignore the relevancy to our lives as Jews. Yehuda just made the statement that he doesn't understand why anti-Semitism continues to exist. Well, it's very clear that the United States economically is going through terrible, terrible times. We here in this room are pretty comfortable, most of us, I assume, and therefore not experience it. But I can tell you, coming from Southern California, the true employment rate, particularly among blacks and Latinos, is probably 15 to 20%. 1 out of every 3 black men, young black men in this country, is now part of the criminal justice system. So who do they turn against? You probably all heard on the news this morning. Farrakhan made the statement yesterday, wonderful statement. The bloodsuckers of America, the Jews and the Asians, are not giving back to the black community. They suck our blood and don't give back. So that's a reality that is out there that we, it has nothing to do, of course, with the unaffiliated Jew, but that's part of the Jewish reality, at least in America, that is there for us.
Thank you. Norman, please.
Dr. Kogel, is this on? Dr. Kogel just said much of what I was going to say, but I'll just add 2 things. Not only do we have a mass demonstration in Washington tomorrow led by a virulent anti-Semite, but according to this morning's New York Times, Abram Foxman of the Anti-Defamation League has endorsed the march. Yes, look it up. It's in the New York Times. He regrets that it's being led by Foxman, but he has endorsed the march. The point is this. What? I'm sorry. I'm groggy this morning. He regrets it's led by Farrakhan, but he endorses it. The point is this, that of course he regrets it, but if it's successful, it will give Farrakhan a position of dominance in the black community. But the other thing I want to say is this, with respect to Mr. Friedler's presentation. He compares the position of the Jews today and 100 years ago, and he says Jews now have a place to go. Well, it depends who you are, and depends how you go. There's no rental housing market in Israel. Therefore, young people immigrating there face a very grim prospect. The cost of residential real estate in Jerusalem and in the plain between Tel Aviv and Haifa is higher than it is in New York City. At the current rate of building, the whole land between Tel Aviv and Haifa will be occupied by expensive residential condominiums within 5 years. And you can see in any issue of the Jerusalem Post by just reading the real estate ads. Most of the 600,000 immigrants from the Soviet Union were not able to find jobs in their occupation in which they were trained. Granted that in some cases the training, as characteristic in Eastern Europe, does not meet very high standards, nevertheless they were not able to replicate their professional status. I couldn't find a job in Israel in my academic profession. Believe me, I've tried. So while in a sense there's a refuge in Israel, it's of a very limited quality.
Thank you. Egon, the other Egon.
I want to pick up on a couple of themes and really continue the sense of optimism with a little touch of critique as well. There seems to be a contrasting of welcoming versus traditional community, as if somehow traditional communities represented solely the most retrograde elements of Jewish culture, and to be welcoming, you have to throw all that overboard. I have to tell you that the people you want to welcome are often looking for precisely the trappings of tradition that you think you have to get rid of in order to be welcoming. Often the people looking to be welcome in the Jewish community come from very ritualistic traditions, and what they want is precisely the benefit of those rituals in their lives, whether it is Shabbat, whether it is Hanukkah, whether it is Rosh Hashanah, whether it is Sukkot. So I don't think that we should naturally leap to the conclusion because the data certainly don't point there, that to be welcoming is to get rid of those things. Precisely the opposite. It is to make those things accessible to people rather than to get rid of them. That's point number one. Point number two is, how do you make that accessible? And I think that I've heard mostly dismissive comments about the power of technology, even though we embrace it, and sometimes it defies us. But the fact is that the use of technology, whether it be computers in the form of CD-ROM or the internet, is a very powerful way to build community, and I must disagree with you on the notion of its coldness, because some of the most intimate conversations and some of the most intimate encounters first occur precisely in the anonymity of the electronic world, where you don't risk being dismissed or disrespected because you're dealing with a faceless other who cares to listen. So I think we have to think very carefully, not only about how we communicate a message, but how do we project an atmosphere of listening and use the technology to project that sense of listening.
Thank you. With regard to internet, I've just learned yesterday that there is a program from London on secular humanistic Judaism. It's going on for about 6 months, and some of you may be interested in it. I understand that Humanora had some details, so perhaps you can inquire here and find out if you are interested. There's quite lively conversations, debates, and so on. Herschel, please.
But a number of things. Herzl's first attempt to deal with anti-Semitism through conversion was a misunderstanding of the nature of the threat. It was no longer a matter of Christian reaction to Jewish infidelity. It was racist anti-Semitism that saw the Jews as a threat that could only be eliminated, not converted. I'm wondering whether in the same way we are misunderstanding the nature of unaffiliation. Most of the ideas I've heard this weekend are pretty much the same ideas that have been projected to the Jewish community for most of my life. Repeating them, perhaps with greater wit and a little bit louder, I don't think is going to solve the problem. One of the problems. Just before Rosh Hashanah, the Los Angeles Times had a very moving article in the religion pages about rethinking the holidays and congregations injecting new spirituality into their high holiday observances. Very impressive, very moving. But the front page of that section carried a news article, Jewish school renamed for Milkins. In exchange for $5 million, a Reform synagogue, historically unfortunately, named for Rabbi Stephen Wise, renamed its day school for the Milken family in exchange for their $5 million of stolen junk bond money. Now, what impression does that leave upon the questioning, the unaffiliated, the vaguely affiliated? For them, it says, this is a community from which I wish to flee. What was the reaction of the organized Jewish community? It justified, in every kind of twisted way, this acceptance of a $5 million bribe on the part of a convicted swindler. What was the reaction of the more ethical-minded aspect of the Jewish community in Los Angeles? Total, complete silence, probably in the name of unity. We talk in terms of and Egon said it in those words, we need to open the gates for the non-Jewish partners in intercultural marriages. Will those open gates result in their entry unless we celebrate both cultures in those marriages? Unless we give validity to the heritage which the non-Jewish partner brings to the family? If we merely say, you are welcome to join us, are we not saying you have to shed your heritage? How successful will that be? If we insist that in the computer age we will someday return to an older concept of community, rather than taking advantage of the new concepts of community that the computer opens, how successful will we be? Repeating our old ideas more articulately, and in most cases simply more loudly, will not solve our problems.
Thank you. Surprisingly, I'm reminded now of more serious institutions that for $5 million would be prepared to rename, or even the institute. Bernard. Egon will now respond. The last one, Bernard, and then Egon responds and we're closing. Okay. Bernard, please.
I think it was refreshing to have Egon Friedler's optimistic approach. The despair which we have known over the past 25 years was essentially based on our doubts as to whether we could survive modernity. I introduced the concept of post-modernity to suggest that that no longer is the central challenge. I think we understand now that Judaism as an option is meaningful to people who are very rational, highly acculturated. That is to say, we have survived, Judaism has survived the snare of modernity for intelligent, modern people. Now, the other value you trumpet, which I agree with fully, is pluralism. We need several options for a diverse postmodern Jewish community. I've been extremely impressed, meeting really first on and intensively the secular humanist movement in these several days. But I would be less than forthright if I didn't share some of my concerns to be sure that you're going to have optimum impact. And two things I would say that give me pause. The first has to do with salience. How salient is your Jewishness in your lives? What amount of time and energy is given to it as it is a factor in your watching children and grandchildren, assessing how important this aspect of your lives are for you? When your children go to school for their Jewish education, and I'm not exactly sure with what frequency and in terms of time per week and over years, I know what it is for the group in Boston, and it's minimal. It's like once in 2 weeks for like 2 hours on a Sunday. The question is, for choosing people about identity, is that going to have enough impact to where Jewishness is going to be a force that they will select as they become adults? And that leads to my second concern. What you present as Jewish, is it sufficiently distinctive so that the people understand this comes from my Jewish heritage? I was a little unhappy with the Friday night lighting of candles with a reluctance to say a Hebrew prayer. However you understand the prayer, why is that not just a pleasant custom? What's Jewish about it if you don't link to the prayer that our generations of ancestors have said before? Is your fear of saying, we bless God? Why not try to understand God in ways that are compatible with your humanistic, secular perspective? I assure you, Jews who are very traditional have been doing that for many years, going back to Maimonides and earlier. If it's not distinctively Jewish and you don't spend enough time in it, will your children and grandchildren see this as an option they're ready to choose which will give meaning to their lives, or will it be so minimalistic in their lives that it will get lost in the shuffle?
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have to allow everyone to finish.
Can I just elaborate on
One
what
word,
Bernie?
please.
Yeah. I have the same concern of Bernie. You, if I wrote the words down correctly, Egon, you said Jewishness always connects with community. The question becomes, what is the minimum of that community that there has to be in order for the connection to survive? I was struck, I found Friday night very moving. I had the same sorts of reservations Bernie did. I was struck, for example, when we sang Seesaw V'Simchat, as I started to say Torah, I saw that the word was Chag. And the question in my mind came, must one really believe in a completely supernatural God in order to see Torah as a symbol that links Jews together? I would argue very strongly that for several thousand years, Torah has been understood by large numbers of traditional Jews in completely metaphoric terms. One does not, in any sense of the word, need to view Torah as a divinely written document. Within the story of Sinai, there are actually two accounts. The first set of tablets was written by God, and they were shattered because human beings couldn't write them. The second tablets were written by Moses. It was a human hand. So that I would argue that one can define at least some of the traditional sacred symbols and rituals in completely humanistic terms, and that, I suspect, would be far more effective in maintaining the Jewish part of the secular humanistic Judaism.
I just say that Sisu B'Simchu B'Simchat Chag is not an invention of this community. It's generally sung in all Israeli kindergartens at any Chag. It's not taking out Torah here at this by the congregation of humanistic Judaism.
But on Sukkot,
I'm sorry.
it's Simchat Torah.
Egon, please.
Well, I would first point to a difference, a very important difference between American Jews and Latin American Jews. Yes, we have rabbis, we have communities, we have Rosh Hashanah, we have Yom Kippur, we have all this, but our most meaningful expression of Jewishness is our attachment to Israel, is that most of us have had a contact when they were young with Zionist youth organization. And the cultural bond between Latin American active Jews and Israel, I would say, is much stronger than I find it in the United States. Of course, anti-Semitism will never disappear. You may have heard, and you are an expert in anti-Semitism, Yehuda, the history of the Japanese who made a fortune out of invention of anti-Semitic books. He never knew nothing about Judaism, but he made a fortune with anti-Semitic books. Well, it's an old tradition and we will never get rid of it. But if you compare anti-Semitism today, what it was, not only 50 years ago, 30 years ago, even in this country, you can't compare. There are hates between peoples and ethnic groups that are much more terrible than anti-Semitism. Well, if we come back to the United States, the problem now is not between Jew and black, but between white and black. And it's a serious problem. I understand you're worried. About Israel, yes, it's not difficult for everybody to find a place there. But you have a heaven. When something happens, when Jews in distress can't live anymore in their own countries, they have somewhere to go. It's not the situation that was at the Vienna conference in 1937 when Chaim Weizmann said there are two kinds of countries, those who don't want Jews and those who will not receive Jews. I would be very glad if my friend Egon Meyer would be right and computers could help to Jewishness. Who knows? Maybe. But I still believe people must know each other directly. And I distrust machines. What can I do? I am old-fashioned in this sense, and I don't think we can build Jewishness through machines.